Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us here today. We're so excited to have you.
Oh, well, you're welcome. I appreciate you having me on.
I love the name of your organization, the title of your book, and what seems to be the philosophy that drives you. Love unleashes life. Can you talk to us a little bit about that philosophy?
Sure. I first got into pro-life work as a result of hearing a pro-life apologist, Scott Klusendorf, who was really imparting the logic of the pro-life perspective, which is foundational to what I do. And what I discovered over time as I started sharing that science and sharing that philosophy and sharing those human rights arguments with people is a lot of students weren't accepting it. And I was like, I don't get it. This makes sense. Why is there resistance? And I started asking questions like, how did you come to your viewpoint? Or where does your passion come from? Or do you know anyone who's had an abortion? And what I discovered is these students started revealing to me their personal life experiences and stories that involved profound pain, deep suffering, great woundedness, living in poverty, growing up, getting food on food stamps, victims of abuse, victims of rape, and so on and so forth. And I started to see that often there was resistance to the logic of the pro-life perspective if there was an emotional wall up because of personal suffering or pain. So that helped me see that as logical as I needed to be, I also needed to have a heart for the person that I was encountering and really needed to convey that I love them as much as I love preborn children. And the viewpoint I hold is not just for the good of the preborn child, but is also for their good, that they will flourish in a world where all humans are respected. And so the more I focused on meeting that person in their pain, hearing their story, and really listening to their needs and concerns, that if they sensed I truly cared for them, they became more receptive to embracing the pro-life perspective.
It's incredibly beautiful. Could you give our viewers an example of a time where you shifted the conversation a little bit to make sure that the person you were talking to knew that you loved them, not just the unborn child?
Yes, I remember two conversations come to mind. Both happened on Florida campuses. One was a student, she was just covered in tattoos, and she was a single mom, and we had been discussing just the logic for quite a while. And then when she started to share her story, like the fact that she was a single mom, I just did a lot of listening. And I thought, okay, she's heard my arguments, she's seen my pro-life message. I should just really receive what she has to say. It doesn't mean I change my viewpoint. I still hold to the truth. I hold to the facts, but I changed my disposition. And there was this beautiful bridge that built between the two of us. And we really connected, and she shared more. And of course, the more someone shares, the more they are indicating they feel safe, that what they say is something that can be trusted by the other party and so forth. So she really transformed before my eyes. And another person was a male student who was focusing on philosophy and philosophical arguments and personhood. And we were going round and round and round. And then he revealed that his mom had been brutally beaten by his dad. At one point, she fled the home with him and his brother, and they lived on the street at one point. They grew up in poverty. And I realized his support for abortion was grounded not in a desire to kill preborn children, but in a desire to spare other children the suffering that he'd experienced. And he didn't want children to come into an environment like his. Now, his solution of abortion being the answer was the wrong answer, but it helped me see where he was coming from. And so at that point in the conversation, when I learned all this, I kind of set aside my arguments and once again, just did a lot of listening, asked him more general questions about his interests in life, about how his mom was doing now. And then he really opened up and talked about how his mom was doing really well and how he's inspired by her. And yet again, I saw a deep connection build between the two of us, because I've been willing to not change positions, but switch directions.
It really seems like so many people who are involved in the pro-choice movement are involved from a place of pain and suffering. How can our viewers keep in mind their pain, the pain that others might be feeling, while trying to promote the dignity of the human person through digital activism?
That's a great question. I think being Socratic is really important. And I realize on digital activism, you can't just only ask a question. There's some need to expound on your viewpoint, but you can still, as much as possible, even present your position in the form of a question rhetorically, and then maybe answer it a bit. But the more we put a message out there that causes the person reading it to say, oh, I never thought of that, or what would my answer be to that? I think it's also important where pro-lifers are willing to share their own story vulnerably, their own positions or life experiences rather of pain and suffering, which will then help build a bridge to someone perhaps being more open to share their pain because they realize, oh, this just isn't theoretical for this pro-life person. This woman had an abortion, or this woman faced an unplanned pregnancy, or she grew up in a difficult home too. But oh, interesting, she doesn't share my view. I wonder why. Now, when it comes to sharing our own vulnerabilities, one thing I do always advise pro-lifers is to share to the extent it will help the other party, not to the extent it helps ourselves. In other words, don't view your sharing as free therapy. We do need to work through our pain, and we should get, clinical professional help for that, spiritual help, friend help. But once we've gotten that help and we've worked through stuff, then our story and sharing it with others in a controlled way to benefit them can be hugely helpful.
Thank you so much for being here with us today, Stephanie, and thank you so much for your tips on how our viewers can share the pro-life message in a way that people are ready and willing to receive.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Please know of our prayers for your continued work, and know of our efforts to also unleash life with love.
Thank you.